The blade is already waiting, glinting with a cold, cruel perfection, its edge sharper than the imagination can conceive. The sun reflects off the polished metal, casting brief, fleeting flashes into the eyes of those who have gathered, a reminder that this day will be remembered for generations. The crowd presses closer, a dense mass of bodies, their collective breath rising in clouds that mingle with the chill morning air. Every face is animated by a different emotion: awe, terror, morbid curiosity, secret glee. Children cling to their parents' skirts, wide-eyed and trembling, while older men and women shift uneasily, as if wishing they were elsewhere, anywhere but here. There is a tension that cannot be spoken of, a shared anticipation so thick it clings to the skin, invades the lungs, and makes every heartbeat louder than the last. The city itself seems to hold its breath. The usual sounds of Paris, cartwheels scraping cobblestones, distant barking dogs, merchants calling their wares, fade into silence. Even the wind seems to pause, as if reluctant to disturb the inevitability of what is about to unfold. And in the center of it all stands Maximilien Robespierre, once a man whose voice could command obedience, whose words could decide life or death. His jaw is shattered, his face swollen and bandaged, a grotesque mask of pain and vulnerability. The instrument he once championed, the guillotine, now waits to claim him. The irony is unbearable, and yet unavoidable. In moments, a sound will erupt from his mouth, piercing, raw, and human. A scream that will forever mark the day when the architect of fear himself became a victim of it. To understand how he came to this scaffold, one must first understand the man he was. Before power, fear, and paranoia reshaped him into a figure both revered and reviled. Robespierre was not born into privilege. He did not inherit crowns or titles, nor was he trained in the ways of generals and soldiers. He was a lawyer, disciplined in thought, meticulous with words, and committed to a vision of moral justice. From the earliest days of his career, he opposed capital punishment, believing that no state had the right to take a human life. Justice, for him, was meant to be reasoned, calm, fair, and deliberate. A sharp contrast to the corruption, cruelty, and self-interest that dominated the courts and corridors of power in pre-revolutionary France. He lived simply, avoided bribes, and followed the law even when it cost him influence and opportunity. Those who knew him admired his consistency, calling him the Incorruptible, a title that reflected both moral admiration and political awe. At first, this title seemed to fit the man perfectly. He appeared incorruptible, unwavering, a beacon of virtue amidst the chaos of a society in moral decay. Robespierre's strict adherence to principle marked him as exceptional, someone who could, perhaps, lead without succumbing to the seductions of power, wealth, or vanity. Yet even then, seeds of the rigidity and moral absolutism that would later define his rule were already taking root. The storming of the Bastille in 1789 marked the beginning of a movement that promised liberty, equality, and fraternity. France, burdened by centuries of inequality, corruption, and oppression, erupted in protest. The Declaration of the Rights of Man spoke to the deep desire of a population long denied agency. Long silenced under monarchic rule, Robespierre emerged naturally from this chaos, a figure whose ideals resonated with a nation desperate for change. He spoke not only of justice, but of virtue, equality, and moral governance, concepts that, in theory, offered a new framework for society. But revolutions are impatient creatures, incapable of waiting for reasoned discourse or moral deliberation. Outside France, monarchies gathered armies to crush the nascent republic. Within Paris, suspicion festered like a disease, spreading rapidly. Loyalties became impossible to ascertain. Friends could be spies, neighbors could be informers. Robespierre, initially an idealist who believed in the power of reason and virtue, began to feel the pressure. He came to believe that moral purity alone could not safeguard the republic. In this new world, mercy was a liability, compromise a betrayal. Violence, if wielded in the service of virtue, could, he concluded, be justified. By 1794, France was no longer a nation fighting external threats alone. It had become a country consumed by its own internal fury. Foreign armies pressed on every border, threatening annihilation. Within Paris, paranoia became a constant companion. People measured every word, every glance, every gesture, fearful that even an innocent remark might be construed as treason. Neighbors watched neighbors, families distrusted each other, and even friends found themselves isolated in suspicion. Prisons overflowed with suspects, so numerous that guards struggled to maintain order. People vanished, sometimes for days, sometimes forever, with no warning, no explanation, and no recourse. The guillotine became part of the city's rhythm, its mechanical efficiency transforming terror into routine. What had once shocked the populace gradually became ordinary. Children saw the executions and asked their parents questions. Adults spoke of them as one might discuss the weather. The city moved through death as it moved through everyday life, inevitable, inescapable, and indifferent to human suffering. In this climate, Robespierre's moral absolutism began to warp, aligning itself with the machinery of terror rather than the ideals of justice he once cherished. June 1794 brought the law of 22 Prairial, a chilling innovation that stripped the accused of the last remnants of protection. Defense attorneys were barred. Witnesses were no longer required. Trials were reduced to brief ceremonies, where guilt was assumed and the verdict predetermined. The law expanded the definition of enemy of the people to encompass almost anyone who voiced dissent. Justice transformed from a careful pursuit of truth into an administrative instrument of elimination. Names went in, bodies came out, and the moral compass of the revolution shifted irrevocably. Robespierre, the man who had once opposed capital punishment, now presided over a machine that devoured citizens with clinical efficiency, a system in which survival was contingent on loyalty, fear, and suspicion. Even as his authority peaked, Robespierre began to collapse under the weight of fear and paranoia. He withdrew from public life, abandoning committees, assemblies, and debates that had once showcased his dominance. Observers noted his frailty, the hollow, haunted look in his eyes, the tension that seemed to constrict his every movement. Fear became his constant companion. Assassination attempts against allies and even against himself reminded him that no loyalty was guaranteed. His retreat was disastrous. Power does not forgive absence. As Robespierre receded from the spotlight, his enemies gained freedom to plot, to maneuver, to reshape the political landscape in their favor. The men plotting against him were not moderates or moralists. They were revolutionaries, hardened by bloodshed and accustomed to sending hundreds or thousands to the guillotine. But now survival demanded Robespierre's fall. Whispers in corridors, secret meetings behind closed doors, alliances forged in the shadows, all conspired to remove the man who had once ruled through terror. There was no compromise, no middle ground. In revolutionary Paris, every word, every gesture, every glance could mean life or death. On July 26, 1794, Robespierre returned to the National Assembly after weeks of absence. His presence alone transformed the atmosphere. He spoke for hours, accusing unseen conspirators, warning of traitors, portraying himself as a martyr surrounded by corruption. He claimed to possess a list of enemies, but refused to disclose names. In a system where vague accusations could lead to instant execution, his silence became a weapon of terror. Deputies, once loyal, now wondered if they were already condemned. Robespierre's words, intended to demonstrate moral vigilance, instead sowed fear, confusion, and discord among his former allies. The collapse accelerated with a merciless speed that stunned even the most seasoned observers. On that fateful day, the very atmosphere of the National Assembly seemed to crackle with tension, charged with fear, suspicion, and bitter anticipation. Allies were silenced mid-speech, their words choked by the sudden eruption of accusations, cries, and chaos. Every gesture, every glance seemed to carry the weight of judgment. The shadow of Danton's execution lingered over the chamber, a ghostly reminder of the consequences of disloyalty. Names were whispered in fear, promises broken under the glare of suspicion, and every deputy felt the icy breath of mortality brush against their necks. The vote for Robespierre's arrest came swiftly, almost mechanically, as though the Assembly had been waiting for this inevitable moment. It was decisive, public, and irreversible. Alongside him, his closest allies, Saint-Just, Couthon, and even his own brother Augustin, were condemned, stripped of protection and subjected to the same ruthless machinery they had once wielded against countless others. Absolute power, once a shield that seemed impenetrable, shattered like fragile glass. The man who had ruled through fear, manipulating lives with the precision of a surgeon, was now revealed as mortal, vulnerable, and profoundly alone. Every look, every whispered word, and every hurried retreat marked the disintegration of authority that had seemed eternal. Robespierre was brought to the Hôtel de Ville, a building that had once promised refuge and protection. But sanctuary became a mirage. Loyalists gathered to resist, their courage faltering in the face of overwhelming numbers, conflicting orders, and the chaos that seemed to seep into every corridor. Hours passed in confusion, each moment stretching painfully, punctuated by the urgent running of messengers through echoing halls, the clash of command and counter-command, and the deafening indecision of the National Guard. Meanwhile, outside, the assembly declared Robespierre an outlaw. Supporters, terrified of instant reprisal, melted away, their loyalty evaporating under the weight of fear. The building itself, once a symbol of resistance and control, transformed into a trap. Doors that should have led to freedom now blocked escape. Windows offered only distant glimpses of a Paris that had become hostile and unforgiving. Fate pressed in relentlessly from all sides, a suffocating force that left no room for hesitation, no possibility of negotiation, and no chance of salvation. When government forces finally stormed the Hôtel de Ville, chaos erupted like a storm uncontained. Accounts differ in the minutiae. Some say Robespierre attempted to take his own life, others claim he was shot amidst the struggle. But what is certain is the result. His jaw was shattered, blood coursing freely, and the mouth that had once commanded obedience was reduced to an instrument of silence. His face was swollen, bruised, and bandaged, yet the eyes that had once inspired both fear and admiration burned faintly with recognition, defiance, and despair. He was carried half-conscious through the halls and streets, each step a grotesque parade of vulnerability. The revolutionary tribunal awaited, an institution he had helped perfect, now turned upon him without hesitation. There was no trial, no chance for explanation, no defense permitted. His identity was confirmed, and the machine of justice, cold, mechanical, and unfeeling, took him with the efficiency he had once enforced on others. The man who had once wielded power through fear had become powerless, a final victim of the system he had crafted. The following day, Robespierre and his fellow condemned were loaded onto carts, their bodies jostled along the cobblestone streets of Paris. The city, familiar yet transformed, bore witness to the passage of a man who had once seemed untouchable. Citizens crowded the streets, some shouting, some cursing, some observing silently, frozen by a mix of fascination and terror. The carts moved slowly, as if the weight of history itself had pressed upon the horses and drivers. Robespierre's face was swollen and bandaged, his body marred by bruises and blood. He could speak nothing, could share no last word, no reflection, no plea for understanding. He was a silent prisoner, carried through the streets of a city he had helped shape into a theater of fear. Each turn of the wheels, each jostle over the uneven cobblestones brought him closer to the scaffold, the stage on which he would meet the same fate he had once so easily decreed for others. The irony was bitter, sharp, and inescapable, a cruel testament to the nature of power and the unforgiving logic of revolutionary justice. At the scaffold, a final obstacle awaited. The bandage that concealed his shattered jaw needed removal. The executioner approached with calculated precision, hands steady, expression unreadable. When the bandage was taken away, the scream that erupted from Robespierre was not of defiance, nor of anger. It was pure human agony, a sound raw and unmediated, echoing across the crowded plaza. It was a scream that spoke not of ideology, but of mortality, not of politics, but of pain. The blade fell with finality. The crowd erupted in a mixture of jubilation, relief, and horror. Terror, in its most concentrated and potent form, had ended for the man who had once wielded it with unerring efficiency. Yet its lessons remained etched into the city, into the hearts of those who witnessed it, and into history itself. The act was immediate and brutal, yet its resonance would endure far longer than any individual life. In the days that followed, executions continued, the wheels of revolutionary justice grinding relentlessly. The focus of power shifted, committees weakened, and political alliances realigned in the wake of Robespierre's fall. Paris, scarred and exhausted, absorbed the shock as though it were a wound that would take decades to heal. Streets whispered with stories of betrayal, fear, and sudden death. The very air seemed imbued with memory, the weight of all that had occurred pressing on every passerby. Those who had conspired to bring Robespierre down did not escape unscathed. Many would themselves face punishment, trials, or executions, demonstrating the endless cycle of fear, revenge, and power that defined the reign of terror. In this shifting, unstable world, morality became subordinate to survival. The revolution, though victorious, remained haunted by its own creation, a system that had devoured those who sought to master it. Robespierre died as he had condemned others, without defense, without voice, without mercy. His scream, etched into the memory of those present, became a symbol of a revolution that had devoured itself. Over 20,000 lives were claimed during the Reign of Terror, but none so emblematic as his. The man whose moral certainty, political acumen, and ruthless enforcement of ideology had once inspired fear was now a cautionary tale of power consumed from within. The legacy of his death was not confined to the pages of history. It rippled across Paris, across France, and across the consciousness of humanity. Robespierre became both a warning and a fascination, the embodiment of virtue corrupted by absolute power, the paradox of a man who sought justice through terror only to fall victim to the very system he had perfected. The life and death of Robespierre illustrate the perilous intersection of idealism and absolute authority. Power, when unchecked, distorts morality, transforms reason into obsession, and converts virtue into cruelty. The machinery of fear that he once commanded became his undoing. His story underscores the fragility of human idealism in the face of ambition, jealousy, paranoia, and the relentless pressures of political survival. The revolution he helped shape demanded perfection, virtue, and unwavering loyalty. Yet when human imperfection inevitably intruded, through error, betrayal, or circumstance, it consumed even the architects of the system. Robespierre's fate demonstrates that the pursuit of justice, when wielded as a weapon, can become indistinguishable from oppression, and that those who enforce ideology with an iron hand are never immune to its consequences. Paris itself bore witness to the consequences of radical ideology, its streets haunted by memory, loss, and fear. Families grieved in silence, neighbors whispered in caution, children grew up under shadows that were cast long before their births. The guillotine, emblematic of moral inversion, continued to operate mechanically, a cold, unfeeling instrument reflecting society's capacity for precision in violence. Robespierre's death marked a turning point. It was not the end of terror, but a reminder that the machinery of fear spared no one. No virtue, intelligence, or loyalty could shield a person from the inexorable logic of revolutionary justice. Every citizen, every official, every observer understood. Power can shift in an instant, and the hands that once held the knife can just as swiftly be laid upon themselves. In the end, Maximilien Robespierre's story transcends biography or political history. It is a meditation on humanity itself, our capacity for creation, for destruction, and for self-inflicted ruin. He rose from obscurity to command a nation, only to fall victim to the very principles he championed. His scream, echoing across the centuries, serves as a stark reminder that ideals enforced through violence inevitably consume the enforcers. For over 200 years, historians, philosophers, and storytellers have debated, analyzed, and reflected upon his life and death. Robespierre embodies the paradox of morality entwined with power, the fine line between savior and tyrant, between justice and terror, between virtue and obsession. In contemplating his fate, humanity is reminded that justice, when wielded without humility and temperance, can quickly become indistinguishable from tyranny, and that even the most principled can fall prey to the machinery they themselves create.